welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're diving into this LinkedIn article. It's called The Digital Dilemma, From IT Management to Digital Transformation Leadership. And it's by Tamer El-Tonsy.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at how the role of IT is changing, with everything going digital.
Right.
And what this means for IT and HR professionals.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating article, especially for folks in IT and HR, trying to figure out how to navigate this shift within their companies. I think the article does a great job of kind of painting this picture of how traditional organizations are grappling with this change.
Yeah. It's not just about getting new software.
Right.
It's a whole new way of thinking about IT's place in the business, right?
Exactly.
So the article starts by taking us back in time, back to the days when IT was basically just like the behind-the-scenes utility, keeping the servers humming, fixing those printer jams, all about cost-cutting and efficiency. Remember those days?
I do. The unsung heroes of the office. Yeah.
But the point the article makes is that, the digital landscape has transformed everything. Tech isn't just about keeping the lights on anymore.
Right.
It's the engine of innovation, right? It's where companies are actually creating value.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just the IT department that's doing it, right?
Yeah.
So the article gives this great example of a retail company where HR actually built their own mobile app for leave management.
Really?
Without even involving IT.
Wow.
Yeah, they used low-code platforms, which are becoming so powerful now.
I know, right?
That, anyone can build basic apps.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's a key takeaway here. In this new digital world, every department needs to be tech savvy. And that traditional siloed approach is breaking down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so IT goes from this back office, cost center to frontline value creator.
Right.
Sounds exciting, but I imagine it's causing a lot of headaches.
It is.
Especially in those big, old school companies.
Definitely.
Which brings us to what the article calls the digital dilemma.
Okay.
So what is the digital dilemma?
Well, the dilemma is that, legacy companies, especially those with, rigid structures, risk-averse cultures, they're really struggling to adapt to this need for speed and agility that's required in the digital world. They're used to those big, slow, carefully planned projects.
Yeah.
Not this constant iteration and experimentation that's needed now. It's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. And to really bring this dilemma to life, the author tells this story about a senior program manager, a guy who's, a total pro at implementing those giant systems like Oracle and SAP.
Oh, yeah.
But he admits that when it comes to this fast-paced, customer-focused development, he feels totally out of his depth.
Yeah, I can see that.
And that's why I think this article is so important for IT and HR folks.
It is.
Because it highlights those skills that both departments need to develop to succeed in this new environment.
Right.
And El-Tonsy really boils it down to 3 core capabilities.
Okay.
Value orientation, experimental mode of working, and customer-centric digital integration.
I like that, yeah.
So let's unpack those a bit.
Okay.
Starting with value orientation. What does that actually mean for someone, working in IT or HR day to day?
It's a mindset shift. Instead of just focusing on efficiency, like you were saying before, you're asking, how can I use technology to directly create value for the business and for our customers?
Right.
So for IT, that might mean developing solutions that open up new revenue streams.
Okay.
For HR, maybe it's using tech to improve employee engagement and boost productivity. It's about aligning your work with the company's strategic goals.
So moving beyond just keeping the systems running.
Right.
It's about actively using tech to make the company more successful.
Exactly.
Okay. And then there's experimental mode of working. This sounds like a pretty big departure.
It is.
From those, traditional waterfall project management approaches.
Yeah, waterfall is all about meticulously planning every step in advance, which really doesn't work in this fast-paced digital landscape.
Right.
So it's about embracing agile methodologies, testing ideas quickly, failing fast, and learning from those failures.
Yeah.
So for both IT and HR, it means getting comfortable with taking risks and iterating based on feedback.
And I can imagine some people in those, kind of rigid corporate cultures getting a bit nervous about that.
Definitely.
All right, but on to the third capability, customer-centric digital integration. This one really jumped out at me because it suggests that IT is no longer just about supporting internal systems.
Right.
They're actually shaping the customer experience now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's about shifting from that reactive, support role
Mm-hmm.
to proactively designing how customers interact with the company digitally.
Right. Like you think about like crafting those seamless, intuitive online experiences that customers now just expect, right?
Right.
Like it has to be smooth. Exactly.
Yeah. It has to be easy to use.
Yeah. So we've identified this gap between, traditional skills and what's needed in the digital world.
Right.
So what are some ways that companies can bridge this gap? The article outlines a couple of key approaches.
It does. It focuses on open innovation and acquisition and integration.
Okay, let's start with open innovation. What does that look like in action?
Okay, so imagine you're a software company
Okay.
that's really struggling to keep up with, what customers are demanding.
Mm-hmm.
With open innovation, you could create a platform
Okay.
where users can actually submit ideas
Wow.
for new features.
Wow.
Some companies even allow customers to contribute code
Really?
to the platform.
That's amazing.
So this can really speed up development and also just make sure what you're building is aligned with what people actually want.
That's pretty radical departure
It is.
from the traditional, closed door approach to IT development.
Yeah, definitely.
So what are the benefits of, opening things up like that? Well, you're tapping into a wider pool of expertise and ideas.
Mm-hmm.
You can potentially accelerate innovation and just make sure those solutions are really aligned with customer needs.
Right from the start.
Right from the start.
But of course, there are challenges.
There are. Like what?
Well, you've got to manage security,
Yeah.
right? And make sure these external solutions are compatible
Mm-hmm.
with your existing systems.
Right.
And there's also just the cultural piece,
Mm-hmm.
getting your internal teams comfortable with this new way of working.
That makes sense. Okay, so open innovation is one approach. What about the other one, acquisition and integration?
So that's a faster route to getting those digital capabilities.
Okay.
Instead of building everything from scratch, you just buy a company
Right.
that already has the expertise you need.
Makes sense, but I'm guessing there are downsides to that as well.
There are. Integrating different company cultures can be a major hurdle.
Uh-huh.
And then you've got the technical challenge of merging different systems.
It can be a real headache if it's not done carefully.
Sounds like there's no easy fix.
No.
And each approach has its own trade-offs.
Exactly. The right strategy really depends on the company's needs, resources, their risk tolerance.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already.
Yeah.
We talked about how the very definition of IT is changing,
Yeah.
the challenges that companies are facing, and these two approaches for bringing in new skills and ways of working.
Mm-hmm.
So where do we go from here?
Well, the article then digs into something that I think is often overlooked in digital transformations,
Okay.
which is the need to actually restructure
Okay.
the company itself.
Right.
So those old school rigid hierarchies
Yeah.
that worked in the past,
Right.
they're actually holding companies back in this new world.
That makes sense.
You need a structure that's as agile as the technology you're trying to implement.
Right. And we'll explore some examples of how companies are changing things up in the next part of our deep dive.
You're right. Those old hierarchical structures just aren't cutting it anymore. And the article highlights how some companies are adopting, well, they're called HR Digital Transformation Centers of Excellence.
Okay. That's a mouthful.
It is.
What are those exactly?
So think of them as like hubs within the company
Okay.
that are dedicated to driving digital transformation
Yep.
across all of HR's activities.
Yep.
They bring together experts from different areas like talent acquisition, learning and development, employee engagement,
Right.
to figure out how to best use technology to, achieve HR's strategic goals.
So it's kind of like a SWAT team for digital transformation,
Yeah.
but for HR.
Exactly.
Bro.
And it's not just about HR. The article also talks about the growing popularity of Agile and DevOps frameworks.
I've heard those terms thrown around a lot, but to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what they mean.
Sure.
Could you break those down for us?
Of course. So Agile is all about breaking down big projects into smaller chunks and working in short cycles called sprints. This allows teams to adapt quickly to changing needs and get feedback early and often.
So instead of spending months or even years planning this massive project,
Right.
you're constantly iterating and improving based on, real-time feedback.
That's the idea.
Okay.
And DevOps takes this a step further by bringing development and operations teams together.
Okay.
So traditionally, these teams worked in silos,
Right.
which often led to delays and conflict.
Right. So DevOps is about breaking down those silos
Yes.
and getting everyone on the same page from the beginning.
Exactly.
Okay.
This helps companies release software updates and new features much faster and more efficiently.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these new approaches to structure and collaboration can really help companies become more, agile and responsive
Right.
in the digital world. But let's say a company manages to adopt these new capabilities, implement new strategies, and even reshape its organizational structure.
Uh-huh.
How do they actually know if they're succeeding?
That's where metrics come in. The article stresses the importance of shifting away from those traditional performance indicators
Mm-hmm.
and adopting new metrics that truly reflect digital success.
We touched on this a bit earlier, but could you give us some specific examples of what those new metrics might look like?
Sure. So traditionally, IT might have been measured on things like system uptime
Right.
or help desk resolution times. Those are still important, but they don't tell the whole story anymore.
So what kind of metrics would paint a better picture
Okay.
of IT's impact in this digital world?
Think about things like customer satisfaction scores for digital interactions.
Okay.
How easy is it for customers to use your website or app? Are they happy with the online experience?
Right.
You could also track the revenue generated from new digital services
Right.
or the speed at which new products and features are being released.
So it's about demonstrating how IT is directly contributing to the bottom line,
Yeah,
not just keeping the systems running.
exactly.
And this applies to HR as well, right?
It does.
Instead of just tracking, the number of training hours delivered,
Uh-huh.
you could measure the impact of those training programs on employee performance or retention rates.
Right, it's about outcomes,
Yeah.
not just activities.
Right. So it's all about aligning metrics with the overall business strategy
Yay.
and demonstrating the value that both IT and HR are bringing to the table.
Exactly. And this shift in metrics can also be a really powerful tool for changing the perception of IT and HR within the organization. Instead of being seen as cost centers,
Right.
they can position themselves as those strategic partners who are really driving business growth and innovation.
That makes a lot of sense. But how do you actually go about gathering and analyzing all of this data? It sounds like a pretty big undertaking.
It can be, but that's where data analytics comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Both IT and HR need to really develop those data analytics capabilities.
Oh.
They need to be able to track the right metrics, analyze the data, and extract those meaningful insights that can inform decision making.
So it's not just about intuition or gut feeling anymore.
No.
It's about using data to make informed decisions about technology and talent.
Exactly. And this data-driven approach can also help to just foster that culture of continuous improvement.
Okay.
By constantly tracking metrics and analyzing data, IT and HR can identify areas where they can improve their processes, enhance that customer and employee experience, and just drive innovation.
So to recap, we've talked about the need for more agile organizational structures,
Right.
the importance of adopting new metrics that reflect digital success, and the growing role of data analytics in both IT and HR.
Right.
I think a lot of our listeners are probably feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this. Where do you even begin to make these changes? What advice would you give to someone who's feeling a little lost in this digital transformation maze?
That's a great question, and we'll explore some practical tips and strategies in the final part of our deep dive.
Yeah, it can definitely feel overwhelming.
But I think the key is to break it down
Okay.
into those, manageable steps.
Okay.
The article doesn't really give like a step-by-step guide,
Right?
but I think we can kind of pull out some actionable advice
Yep.
from what we've already talked about.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So let's start with those 3 capabilities.
Right.
How can IT and HR professionals actually develop these,
Yeah.
in a practical way?
Think about it like building any new skill, right? It takes that combination of learning, practice, and mindset.
Right.
So for IT, like mastering those emerging technologies, that's essential. Cloud computing, AI, cybersecurity, you got to be on top of your game.
So lots of online courses, certifications, maybe even a coding boot camp or 2.
Absolutely. Attend industry conferences, network with other professionals, just stay curious about the latest trends.
And for HR folks, it's about becoming experts in, digital talent acquisition,
Yeah.
change management, and organizational design.
Right. And, for HR, that might mean exploring like micro-learning platforms for employees
Right.
or figuring out how to use VR simulations for training. And
Yeah.
of course, keeping up with how technology is changing recruiting and onboarding.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for both IT and HR, don't underestimate the power of just experimenting,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like try out new tools, pilot
Absolutely.
different approaches, see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, that hands-on experience is so valuable,
It's almost like giving yourself permission to be a beginner again,
right?
which can be tough for experienced professionals.
It can be.
But this article really underscores that in the digital world, like continuous learning
Yes.
is non-negotiable.
It really is. The moment you think you've arrived is the moment you start falling behind.
Right.
And here's another key point. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Mm.
Find mentors, join professional organizations, connect with peers who are going through, similar challenges.
Right. Building that network is so important.
It is
Especially in a field that's changing so rapidly.
absolutely.
You need people you can bounce ideas off of,
Yes.
learn from,
Right.
and maybe even commiserate with.
Exactly. Digital transformation is not a solo mission. It's a team sport.
Right.
And when IT and HR work together effectively,
Yeah.
they can really drive incredible results.
So we've talked about practical steps,
Right.
but there's also the mindset piece.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who's feeling overwhelmed or even a bit scared of all this change?
Yeah, I mean, feeling overwhelmed is normal.
Right.
It means you're paying attention, you're trying to adapt. This isn't easy stuff.
Right.
But instead of fearing the unknown,
Yeah.
try to see it as an opportunity.
Okay.
This is your chance to, redefine your role and become a true leader
Right.
within your organization.
It's almost like becoming a digital pioneer, right?
Yeah.
Charting new territories,
it is.
shaping the future of work.
That's a great way to put it. And this brings us to a really important point that the article makes.
About how we measure success
Right.
in this new world.
Yeah.
It's not just about keeping the systems running or hitting those traditional metrics anymore.
Right. We talked about the need for new metrics that reflect digital achievements. But what does that actually look like in practice? Could you give our listeners a few more concrete examples?
Sure. So let's say you're in IT and you've implemented a new chatbot to handle customer service inquiries.
Okay.
Instead of just tracking how many inquiries the chatbot handles,
Right.
you also want to measure customer satisfaction with the chatbot experience.
Okay.
Are they getting their questions answered? Are they happy with the interaction?
So it's not just about automation.
Right.
It's about making sure that automation is actually improving the customer experience.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Or let's say you're in HR and you've launched a new online learning platform for employees.
Okay.
You could track metrics like course completion rates,
Mm-hmm.
but you also want to look at how that learning is translating into improved job performance.
Are employees applying what they've learned? Has it led to, increased productivity or innovation?
It's about connecting the dots between the training
Yeah.
and tangible business outcomes.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's the key message you want our listeners to take away from this discussion?
The digital landscape is changing at an unprecedented pace.
Mm-hmm.
And IT and HR professionals are right at the heart of this transformation.
Right.
It's challenging, but it's an incredibly exciting time
Yeah.
to be in these fields. Embrace the change, stay curious, never stop learning,
Mm-hmm.
and don't be afraid to push those boundaries of what's possible.
And remember, you don't have to do it alone.
No, you don't.
Find your tribe,
Find your people.
build your network, and support each other along the way.
Absolutely.
The future of work is being shaped by those who are bold enough to embrace the unknown and chart a new course.
Beautifully said.
And on that inspiring note, we wrap up our deep dive into the evolving world of IT and HR in the age of digital transformation. We hope you found this discussion insightful and thought-provoking. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep transforming.